Our speaker is a graduate of Harvard, a lawyer, and a veteran of unusual military service. For he was, for 6.5 years, a personal aide to General Douglas MacArthur. During the occupation of Japan, the Korean War, and General MacArthur's early months back in the United States, he was with the general at some very momentous times. He managed also to be present at another momentous occasion, for he was one of the original founders of the John Birch Society when our organization was begun in 1958. He serves today as a member of the council and as a member of the important 7-man executive committee of that council. He also serves as the chairman of the annual New England Rally for God, Family, and Country. Our speaker serves, in addition, as the acting president of a very impressive and important organization called the MacArthur Memorial Foundation, located in Norfolk, Virginia. He will speak to us tonight about this foundation and about the great American whose memory it will serve to keep alive. Ladies and gentlemen, Colonel Lawrence E. Bunker.
Thank you very much, everybody, for a chance to come and talk once more, even if briefly, on one of my favorite subjects. Because unlike the tradition started, I believe, by Madame George Sand, that no man is a hero to his valet, Douglas MacArthur was a hero, at least to his aides and people who worked closely with him. And it is really delightful on occasion to have a chance to tell you a little bit about the personality of the man. And contrary to the introduction which I've just been given, I won't take any time away from that subject with other New England stories which are equally effective. And but I will also reverse the order of the topics which he assigned to me, because I'd rather tell you about my experiences with the general and then tell you a little bit about what the foundation is doing in Norfolk. Because many people have asked me, well, what was the general like personally? What sort of a person was he to work with and for? And was he a stuffed shirt? Was he difficult? And the answer is a very positive no. He was a perfectly wonderful person to work with and for, and he had many characteristics which account for the tremendous loyalty of many of the men who served closely with him over his long military career. Because the general was very generous to his subordinates in his praise, in his congratulations, and in his assignment of credit. There were many occasions, I know, where some of his junior officers took what I thought was unusual amount of the credit that really belonged elsewhere, and he would smile and say, well, Larry, don't let that bother you. There's enough credit for all of them. And meaning himself among others. And very often when things went wrong, he publicly took the responsibility for it and did not blame the subordinate who had not performed his job. Because, as he said to me on one or more occasions, Larry, he said, I felt sure that was going sour, but I couldn't do anything else. I had nobody else I could put into that job. Because always, you must remember, in those years in the Pacific and in Japan, MacArthur was some 10,000 miles away from the employment office. And particularly in Australia in the early days, it was a case of the famous Army tradition of make do, because if an officer were returned to the United States as not being up to the standards out there, they would counter next time and say, well, we sent you out so many officers, and you didn't need them all. Why did we send you more? And we were at the end of the line, and I remember one occasion when General Brian Somerville came out, and at the end of the trip with him, he said to me, "Larry, I don't understand why you have so much deadwood in so many positions of importance out here." And I said, "Well, General, we'd be happy if we didn't, but what else can we do with it? The certain jobs that have to be done, and this is the only way we can get them done." And that was one of the tragedies of MacArthur's career, was that he was seldom supplied with adequate material or supplies or personnel to do the bang-up job that he would have liked to done in many situations. And I think one of the most important things to tell you perhaps is about the experience that I had in Manila at the time the word came through of the Japanese willingness to surrender. And I was at that time working as special assistant to General Richard Marshall, who was acting chief of staff at the moment. And General MacArthur came into the office. I got up to leave, and the general said, "Don't go, it's all right." And then he proceeded to talk to Dick Marshall about what was going to happen, because he said even the emperor cannot tell the Japanese people that they have been defeated. But it's got to be the emperor who's going to bring about the surrender. And he's going to have to issue, for the first time in his career, an imperial rescript direct to the people and the military. And in that, he's going to have to make this point and this point and this point, and he's going to have to tell them not that they've been defeated, but that in order to prevent further suffering and loss of life on both sides, he has decided that the war must be ended. He went down a list, and I must say at that point that I was not as devoted an admirer of the general as I became later, largely because of my ignorance. And I thought to myself, well, he certainly is sticking out his neck this time. And I waited. And 2 weeks later, when the imperial rescript was broadcast from Tokyo, in it was every point the general had made. There weren't any others. They weren't precisely in that order, but every point that he had made was covered in that. And I felt, after hearing that and reading the report, that after all, perhaps we could trust a military man to be the administrator of a conquered country. It all ended up, as you may know, that when the general was recalled, the leading Tokyo daily published an editorial of farewell, which started off with "sorrow in our hearts," and then a few more flowery phrases. "We bid farewell to our beloved conqueror." And as Mr. Herbert Hoover pointed out at the MacArthur 80th birthday dinner, when ever in history had anything of that sort ever occurred before? When had a conqueror become beloved by the people that had been conquered? But it was true. And that is one of the great characteristics of the general. And one of the things which I feel is outstanding in what he contributed to contemporary history. Because I have always felt that if anyone were entitled to a peace prize for those years immediately following the end of the war, General MacArthur was, because of the stability in the Pacific area that he created by his wise administration of Japan. Because it was outstanding. He knew what the Japanese people expected. And this was one of the outstanding characteristics of the general, that he had a great sense of the fitness of things. He knew what should be done on certain occasions, and he did it almost instinctively. He didn't have to stop and figure, well, now should I do this or should I do that? He knew what he should do, and he proceeded to do it. And a lot of these people who have criticized him as being dramatic and over-theatrical and such are people who never could have done these things naturally, who would have had to put on a performance in order to do them. But the general didn't. They came naturally to him. He did them, shall we say, with the greatest of ease and the greatest impressiveness, because it was so right, and everybody who watched him in action realized that it was right. And it was marvelous to work with somebody who was so sure of protocol and all these other things and could carry it off as beautifully as he did. Of course, he was an impressive personality, but he was a delightful one. He had a wonderful sense of humor, and he also had, which many people find hard to believe, a sense of humility. I remember one occasion when there was to be a change in the occupant of the prime ministership in Japan. And that had to have clearance from the intelligence section under General Willoughby and the government section under General Whitney. And I had to go up to the embassy. The word came in the early evening. I had to go up to the embassy and present the proposal to General MacArthur and then wait for his reply. Well, that meant we had to get in touch with these two other officers and wait for official clearance before I could go back and give the message to the Japanese that it was all right to go ahead and make the announcement. General MacArthur had an interesting habit. He paced a great deal, even while he was carrying on a conversation. And those who dealt with him on those occasions was almost always put to it, although those people were hard put to it sometimes, as to whether to sit still and keep following him with their eyes, or whether to get up and walk with him. And I had been walking with him that night, and suddenly he turned completely silent, and we made another couple of turns around that particular room. And then he turned to me and he said, "You know, Larry, this is a right liberal education for a military man." And it expressed something which was innate in the man, and something which a lot of people never had a chance to observe. Because, of course, those aspects he kept undercover when he was in public. Because as a public figure, he felt he had to carry a certain dignity, and he couldn't relax quite to that same extent. And the same way when we came into Hawaii on the way back on that famous flight, people looking out the window of the plane saw this enormous crowd at Hickam Field. The general saw it, and they commented on it to the general, and he said, "I wonder why there's so many people out at this hour of the night," because it was in mid-evening. And somebody said, "Well, they're out here to greet you, General." And he said, "Well, I hope they haven't come just because they're sorry for me." And he never really understood the popular reaction to him on many occasions. Now, what we're trying to do down at Norfolk is to keep the memory of the man alive, but also to educate the oncoming generations into what a great American he was. Because, as far as I'm concerned, he ranks along with George Washington in our American history. There has never been anyone else in the picture, as far as my reading has shown, that had the amazing combination of military genius and also statesmanship. And there is no doubt in my mind that General MacArthur's mind was that of a genius. I could give many examples to prove that to you, I believe, but I want to tell you a little bit about the foundation, because just before the general died, a couple of years before, he came to an agreement with the city of Norfolk, which was the birthplace of his mother, to whom he was very devoted, that when he died, they were going to create a memorial for him, or would have created it by that time, where he could be buried and his wife could be buried later, and to which he would turn over all his memorabilia and all his archives. And that was carried through, and they took the old city hall, which had become a courthouse, and converted it into a magnificent memorial. And I urge all of you to go and see it on some occasion, because it's not only an inspiring building, but it also is an extremely interesting one because of the material that is there. We are constantly trying to add to that material, and we are succeeding from time to time in making significant additions to the collection. But we are also trying to make it a research center on the period of American history with which the general was so closely associated. We have plans in cooperation with the city of Norfolk, to whom the memorial belongs and to whom all this memorabilia belongs. But the foundation is a private corporation that works hand in hand with the city government on trying to develop this. We have established some scholarships for research into various phases of MacArthur's career, and we are cooperating with everybody who wants to find out more of the precise details of what went on in his life and particularly in Japan. because that period in Japan, of course, is of the greatest significance after the war with Japan was over. And, of course, his conduct in the Korean War, the Incheon operation, which was a fantastically successful military gamble, and one which puts him in the front rank of all military strategists. And we want to get people to come down there and to study and work and find out what actually happened. Because there are many myths that are being circulated. We try to pick them up as they crop up and refute them or document their reputation. And we are kept quite busy sometimes. And at the moment, of course, there's a considerable interest in him. The BBC has just completed a documentary film on MacArthur in their series of Great Commanders of World War II, which will be released in England sometime this fall and probably sometime in America this winter. I believe it's to be on CBS. That's completely documentary in that it takes newsreel shots from the past and interviews some of the people who served closely with the general. Then, as you probably have read in the press, Frank McCarthy, who did the Patton film, is at work on a film on General MacArthur. How soon that will be completed, nobody is quite clear. Just how it will treat the subject, whether it will give it the Hollywood spectacular and get away from history, because I find that Hollywood producers are quite convinced that God had no understanding of audience impact, and that many of the things that happened according to God's plans just have got to be rearranged in order to get that real audience impact. So what's going to happen to that film, I really don't know. But there is a considerable interest in him, particularly because of the violation of so much he believed in by recent authorities in Washington, particularly the attempt to deny the validity of his thesis that in war there is no substitute for victory. Thank you for this chance.
Thank you very much, Colonel.